Thank you. Welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch. And I'm here to talk about open source when nights and weekends are not enough. My name is Ernesto Tagwerker, and you can find me on GitHub or Twitter with the handle etagwerker. So if you have a question after this and we don't get to talk, feel free to reach out on Twitter. Now, if you can't tell from my name, I'm originally from Argentina, okay? And I live in Philadelphia with my wife and daughter. And this is my first time in Nashville, and I love it so far. So thank you to all the organizers, and thanks for picking this talk. I'm the founder of Umbu Labs. Umbu Labs is a small software development company that focuses on Rails, Ruby, and JavaScript development. Now, we use a lot of Rails at our company. We work on projects that are, a lot of them, migrations from Rails 2.3 to 4.2, from 4.0 to 5.1. You know, all the projects that you don't want to work on, we do, okay? And if you're looking for a job, we are remote friendly, and we're constantly looking for new developers. So feel free to check out our site and see if you like what you see. And also, if you have a Rails migration that you want to work on or you know that you need to do, feel free to ping us as well. I'm one of the software engineers as well as at Umbu Labs. So I still work with the code every day. And ever since I started working with Ruby and Rails around 2010, I've also been maintaining and contributing gems. Maybe one of the most popular ones is Database Cleaner. So Database Cleaner is a small gem that helps you keep a clean database between tests. You know, it's very small and it has been very challenging. I wasn't the first person to work on it, but I did end up maintaining it, and I've learned a lot. Also, at home, I am a father and husband. This is Lucila. Lucila is a year and a half, and she is just the best. Every time I get home after work and I see her, she just brightens up my days. And she just loves airplane rides. So anyway, you can see that I'm actually enjoying this more than her, but she does enjoy it as well. Now, I love that this talk got accepted because I get to talk about three things that I love. I love parenting, I love open source, and I love Ruby. So thanks a lot to Jason and his team for giving me the opportunity. Now, don't worry if you're not a parent, because this talk is also about open source and the lack of time to actually work on open source. So if you don't have free time, you don't have nights and weekends to dedicate to open source, I hope that you'll find my tips interesting. I'm going to tell you a little about my experience pre-parenting and post-parenting. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what an open source contribution is. And finally, I'm going to share some tips for maintainers, contributors, and managers. So let's start with the first one. Pre-parenting, I felt like I had so much time. You know, I could work on open source every night, an entire night. And nights, we all know, are special because there are no emails, no Slack notifications, no interruptions, no calls, nothing. You can basically enter the state of flow and focus on a problem for a few hours uninterrupted. And it was great. I would do it very often. Now, I could also work entire weekends. I could just tell my girlfriend and friends, hey, see you on Monday. I'm going to work on this for 2 days straight. So basically, I had a lot of time, and I used it a lot to work on open source. But then Lucila was born. And this was one of the happiest days of my life, okay? This was about a year and a half ago. And everything you've heard about parenting is true. It's a roller coaster of emotions, basically. This is you get to see your daughter for the first time, and you're super happy. You get to see every little thing that she does that nobody finds interesting, but you do, and it is just wonderful. But then you have weeks where you don't sleep, and sleep deprivation sucks. So there you have a low. It's constantly like that. And it definitely changes your life, not only on a personal level, but on a professional level. So post-parenting, you can no longer work every night. You might want to, but every day you'll get to work, you'll work, then you'll get home, you'll pick up your daughter from daycare, you will play with her, you will feed her, you will bathe her, and then eventually when you had your dinner, your energy will be like low, super low, okay? So even if you wanted to work, you would probably write terrible code because your brain would be fried. So maybe some nights you have good days where maybe your partner helps and takes care of your daughter in the entire day. And maybe, yeah, at the end you can actually work on open source. But it's not usually like that. So now it becomes some nights you can work on open source. Now entire weekends are out of the question because you want to spend time with your daughter. You want to see her take her first steps, say her first words, and those 2 days are for your partner and for your daughter. And I encourage other parents to do this as well. Because when are you going to get to experience that other than during the weekend? So maybe after you put her down, you can actually go and work on open source, which is good. So entire weekends now become some weekend nights. So the solution is simple, right? We all need to work on open source at work. Great. Yeah, simple, easy. Well, not really. I was actually surprised to see that in the latest open source survey, this was reported, that using and contributing to open source often happens on the job. I was like, wow, this is surprising because I thought it was all about weekends and nights. So I'm going to share some tips about my own workflow and how I apply it to make open source contributions during the work week. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about what we consider an open source contribution. One way is to use a library and solve a particular problem, and then eventually something doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So you submit a new issue. Great, you're adding value to the library because you're reporting something that's odd and that needs to be fixed or improved. Another way is to take it one step further. You looked at the issue, you did your research, and you actually found that by changing a few lines in the library, you can actually submit a set of changes that it's basically a pull request and add value to the project like that. Yes, that is a great way to do it. A third one would be to create an open source project. And that means that you found a problem that was generic enough that you could work on a solution that would be later reusable and it would benefit other developers. Something like what Adam said a few minutes ago. Yes, that is a great way to contribute to open source, and you should do it as much as possible. And if you go to your GitHub page, you're only going to see these things. And I love GitHub. I use it all the time, not only for private, but also for public projects. And they've definitely helped us contribute and collaborate a lot around open source. But don't take that as the law, okay? That's their way to interpret what an open source contribution is. And there are other ways to do it. So other ways to contribute could be adding additional information to an existing issue. So you did your research and you found that this issue has already been reported. You read the entire thread of comments and you see that there's some missing information there. So you post a comment and you add some info over there that gives context to the contributors and maintainers to eventually fix the problem. Great. Another way is to look at the entire thread of comments in the issue and think about workarounds. We all do this. We have the issue and we try 27 different types of workarounds. And eventually one will work. And you can post a comment to the issue and share it with the world. And that later will unblock other people in your same situation. Now this is not going to show up in your activity feed, but this is a great way to add value to an existing issue. Another way would be to find the question in Stack Overflow or to post a question in Stack Overflow and to add the answer later. And we all do this, right? Like we find an issue, we Google, and we find either a GitHub issue or a Stack Overflow page or a blog post. And this is another way to add value to a project, to give back to the community. So when you think about an open source contribution, think about this. It's basically adding value to an open source project. It doesn't necessarily need to happen on Stack Overflow or GitHub or GitLab. You know, it can happen in your blog. It can happen on Twitter, CodePen, you know? All right, so I'm going to share some tips, and I decided to give tips to 3 different types of people involved in the open source process. The first one is for contributors. Contributors are basically any software engineer that submits issues or change requests to a particular project. Then we have maintainers, which are a sort of contributor that basically gets to decide whether a commit gets merged into the project or not. It's someone who gets all the requests and all the questions and replies and gives you feedback about the changes you want to add to the project. And finally, we have managers. Now, this is a weird one, but they're necessary because if you're going to do open source contributions at work, you need their support. You know, you need them to be behind you and to basically give you the time to make the contribution. So I have 8 tips for contributors. And the first one I think is the most important one, and that is to bake in open source contributions during your workflow. And I'm going to show you 2 different types of workflows. First, a workflow without contributions. So we've all been there, where basically we are using an open source library, and we find that there is an issue. Something is not working the way it's supposed to, or something, we were getting an error or something. And okay, the first thing you probably think is that it's you, right? You're not using it right. So you do your research, and you find that you're actually using it the way it's supposed to. But you still get an issue, you still get an error. Eventually, you determine, okay, I actually found a new bug in this library. And you try a few different hacks to fix the problem. You try a monkey patch. You try, using the library in a different way. And you find a solution. You apply the solution to your project, and you move on to the next problem. Oops. All right, there's nothing wrong with this. This is how we work, and we get paid to ship value to our customers. We get paid to ship fixes and features. This is totally fine. But you're missing an opportunity to make an open source contribution. Let's look at the same workflow with an open source contribution. The first 4 steps are basically the same. You found a new bug, and you're sure it is a bug because you did your research, and you have a lot of context to actually report a bug. And that's what you do. You take the extra time to submit a new issue. And maybe you know so much about this issue at this point that you can work on a set of changes to fix it. Now, this is not necessary. Like, it's great if you just submit the issue and then wait for a maintainer to get back to you. But if you can try to solve it, great, submit a pull request. And then you can apply the patch to your own project and move on to the next problem. I know that this takes more time, okay? I know that the 2 workflows are different because one is fast, the first one is fast, and the second one actually needs you to take the time to submit the issue and to submit the pull request. But you are going to be giving back to the community, and that's great because you won't later have to maintain your monkey patch. This other tip is related to the first one, and it's to basically use bundle open and byebug. You know, when you're debugging the problem in your own project, you can use bundle to open the local copy of the library in your environment. And you can add a byebug statement right before the place where it starts failing. And this will help you not only find more information about the context of the issue, but maybe even to find a patch for the problem. Okay, so when you submit an issue, you want to submit all your research, because at the point where you're ready to submit the issue, you have done a lot of work to find out what is going on. And you don't want to do things like this. Like for database cleaner, a lot of issues that I've read have been database cleaner is not cleaning. Okay, yeah, I understand. That is a problem, and I'm sorry you're running into that. But database cleaner supports a lot of ORMs and a lot of databases and a lot of strategies. So when you submit an issue to database cleaner, please add this information because it will help me save time, because you'll already tell me like what version you're using, what combination of components you were trying to use, and I'll be able to help faster. And this is something that I encountered with Simple Form. I was trying to use Simple Form in a project that was basically a huge monolith that used a component-based Rails architecture. Now, Simple Form works very well with Rails 4.2. But in my particular case, I was running into this error where basically env was not defined in the Rails module, which basically in human, it means that Rails env wasn't loaded when you were trying to use it. So when I submit the issue, I submit a descriptive title, I submit the context, I submit a little more information about the context. So it is, what's weird about my environment is that it's a component-based Rails architecture, and the error that I get is from within a component. So you want to try to explain what is different about your application than all the other applications that use Simple Form. So you submit a backtrace, and then if you know what solution you could apply, maybe you can submit that too. And in this particular case, I had found a patch for Haml that solved this particular problem. So I added a note about that. Another tip is to submit small pull requests. Maintainers are usually busy and usually work nights and weekends. So what you want to do is save them time. And when you submit a small pull request, the smaller it is, the faster you'll get a response. And that's just logic, like the smaller the change set, the faster you'll get a response. For this particular issue, I submitted a pull request that was a one-liner to Simple Form. And it basically applied the patch that I found for Haml. And I know it doesn't have tests, but really it's like just so trivial that the maintainer could just look at it and be like, okay, yeah, you're checking if Rails env is defined before you actually try to use it. So anyway, try to keep it small. Don't modify the versions in the library. Don't add superfluous code. Just keep it as small as possible. Another tip is to keep up with the latest versions. Now, if you submit an issue to Rails 5.0 or 5.1, you'll find that you'll get a response pretty quickly. If you submit an issue for Rails 4.0, you're never going to get a response because it's no longer maintained. Okay? So try to keep up with the latest versions because they're the ones who get the most attention. And it will also give you opportunities to submit pull requests to the libraries that need to support the latest versions of Rails, for instance. And this is something that I did for the departure gem. Now, in this particular project, it was a migration from Rails 4.0 to Rails 5.1. And this project was using departure, which is a MySQL driver. And I did my research, and I found that someone had already submitted a pull request for Rails 5.1. I looked at the changes, and I saw that if I added a few more changes, I could make it compatible with Rails 5.0. And I did. I worked for a couple hours, and I found a solution for this. And when I submit the pull request, I'm like, hey, I noticed that at yhanes took us like 90% there for Rails 5.1. I just added 2 more commits to make it compatible with Rails 5.0. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do this if I had been using Rails 4.0 or Rails 3.0, because Departure already had support for that. So anyway, try to keep up with the versions, and that will give you opportunities to come up with contributions to your libraries. Another tip is very much related to what Adam said a few minutes ago. To solve every problem as if your code were to be open sourced. Now, every time you face a problem, you will usually try to find a library that solves that problem for you. If you don't find anything, you'll usually just write the code and fix it for your project. But you can actually take another strategy and think about this. Before you start working on the code, you can think, okay, there's no gem for this. I'm going to build a gem for this. And this is something that we did for this particular problem. So as I said, I'm from Argentina, and we have a product that's basically in the e-commerce space for Argentina. And we had a need. We had a problem that we needed to fix, and it was basically to print official invoices with physical data. So it sounds like a generic problem that could have a gem out there. We did our research, and we found nothing. So before we started working on this, we were like, we are going to create a gem for this. And this is a project that came out of it. Now, I didn't really work on this code, okay? I reviewed it, but one of the software engineers in my team worked on it. He solved it, he applied the patch, or he developed the feature, deployed it, tested it in production, and everything was working fine. Now, at this point, there was no gem. I encouraged him to take the time to actually gemify this, package it, and publish it online, just like what Adam explained earlier today. Now, I knew this was going to take time, and I encouraged him to do it anyway. And if you're a manager, I think that you should do that too. It is a great practice. Now, let me tell you why. Because when we launched this, it had support for 2 types of invoices. And now, a few weeks ago, we got a pull request for a 3rd type. And this wouldn't have happened if we had kept it close to our own project. Another tip, and this is more of a general one, is to contribute with something that you're passionate about. And when I started with Ruby, I was very passionate about REST APIs and mashups and doing interactions between 2 different REST APIs. And I found that Topsy, this search engine powered by tweets, had recently released a REST API. And I thought, cool, I want to play around with this. But there was no Ruby client for it. So I worked for a couple days, and I came up with a gem that allowed me to connect to the REST API and play with it with Ruby. And that's how rTopsy was born. rTopsy is a small library that lets you talk to Topsy. Now, the problem is that Topsy is dead, okay? Apple bought them, and they killed the project a few years ago. But it was a great learning experience, and I learned a lot in the process. At the time, I was very happy until a week went by. And I noticed this guy on Twitter had just published the same gem. It was actually called Topsy, not rTopsy. And I reached out to him. Some of you might know Win. But I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, it seems like you published a gem that solves exactly the same problem that I did with rTopsy. And this is when you might know him. He's a really cool guy. He was like, hey, sorry. I Googled, and I didn't find anything. So I went on and wrote my own gem. OK, it's an honest mistake. I get it. But it was a bummer, you know, because I had worked on something, and then someone came along and did it better. But this gave me an opportunity to learn from this. So I looked at his code, and I saw that his gem already had tests. And I reached out to him again, and I was like, hey, it seems like your gem is better than mine. So maybe we can collaborate. And he was super friendly, and he said, yes, let's do it. And I started collaborating with him from then. So this brings me to my last tip for contributors is to reach out to open source developers because they're constantly trying to keep up with their projects. They usually don't have the time, and sometimes they need to leave the projects, so you might end up being a maintainer for one of the gems that you use. This is something that happened with Database Cleaner and Email Spec. I had made some contributions back in the day, and I noticed that the maintainer was just leaving the project. He was no longer working with Ruby, and he was looking for someone to take care of the projects. So I reached out to him, and I must have been the only one who reached out because I got to maintain it. And that's how I ended up maintaining these gems. So think about this. Maintainers are usually open to get help, so feel free to reach out to them. Now a couple tips for maintainers. The first one is to be responsive. Now I know we're all very busy, but it really sucks when you work on an issue, you submit a pull request, and that just sits there idle for 3 months or 6 months or a year. And if you've made a contribution, you've probably been there before. How many people have made contributions here? Oh, great. Okay, so most of you know that sometimes you submit a pull request and it just sits there with no response. No, yes, this is great. No, this sucks. Nothing, like silence. And to be honest, that is something that shows in the latest open source survey. Out of the top 3 problems that you will encounter in open source projects, 2 of them are related to responsiveness. Number 2 is unresponsiveness. And the third one is dismissive responses. So as a maintainer, you can do a lot by being responsive. And it really sucks when you make a contribution and they don't respond. It's just super demotivating, and you're probably not going to make another contribution to that project. This is something that happened with the pull request that I mentioned before. Rafael Franza got to see the issue, review the request, or the pull request, and merge it within the first 16 minutes. Now, this has definitely never, ever happened to me, so I just wanted to mention it because it inspired a feeling in me that, man, I just want to make more contributions to this project. I just want to make more contributions to Rafael Franza. You might know him. He's a core committer for Rails and a lot of other projects. But anyway, this was great. And this is the feeling that you want to inspire in your contributors, to not only submit one pull request, but many pull requests, and to maybe help you co-maintain the gem. Which brings me to my other tip, which is to actively search for co-maintainers for your libraries. Now, nobody ever said that you have to do this alone, okay? You're not alone. There's a lot of people who are interested in helping you. So, to be honest, I have been really bad at this. And that's why I would like to officially announce that I'm looking for co-maintainers for Database Cleaner and Email Spec. All right, so if you've used them, or if you just want to get into open source, please talk to me after this, because I would love to mentor you, like what Adam said, to mentor you into becoming contributors and maintainers. Because I think a successful open source project is successful because of its maintainers and because of it has a team of maintainers, not just one person. Now, a couple of tips for managers, okay? Because if we're gonna make contributions during our work week, we need our managers to be on board, okay? If they're like, no, you can't make contributions, that's it, you can't do it. But if they're on board, and I don't see why they wouldn't be, then you can start contributing to open source projects to take the extra time to make the contributions. So if you're a manager, how many managers do we have here? Okay, good, not that many. But eventually you will become a manager, okay? And you will manage other people, and hopefully you will apply this. So the first tip is to encourage your team members to make contributions. I know, it takes extra time, and they won't be able to submit as many features to the project. But this is so important because you're using a lot of open source in your projects. And you want to build shared knowledge in your team. So when your developers submit an issue or submit a pull request, they're learning so much about the libraries, and they're sharing it with the entire team. So please encourage them to work on open source. Another tip is to implement something like recurring open source days. Now, this has worked very well for us at Ombu Labs, where we do open source Fridays. Now, it doesn't have to be every Friday. It could be open source every other Friday or half day on Fridays. But this is great when everybody can just stop what they're doing on the client side and then work on open source libraries. All right. So if you take anything away from this, I hope that it's worth it to invest the time contributing. As a contributor, you'll learn so much about the libraries that you use. You'll submit issues, pull requests, and you'll interact with software engineers around the world. You will learn a lot. I can promise you that. You'll also raise your profile for your next job. As maintainers, you need to invest the time building a team of co-maintainers because you don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community and a great community that will support you. And as a manager, you need to invest the time on your team. It's a great signal when a manager is like, hey, take the time to make the contribution because we're going to need this patch in the next version of the gem. Also, your team won't have to maintain hacky solutions or monkey patches if you submit a pull request to the library. All right, so please invest the time and contribute to open source in any way you can. Thank you.